Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chatting with the Experts with me, your host, Paula Okone, where I speak with women from Africa, from the Caribbean, and in the diaspora. These are professional women. These are entrepreneurs who have been very successful at what they do. And our mission jointly is to educate, empower, and inspire women globally. Today, we are going to be talking about how from adversity comes strength, and from strength comes healing. My guest is Delores McPherson, and I'll tell you a bit about her. She has worked in mental health and with children and families for over 25 years and holds professional qualifications in psychology, clinical supervision, trauma-focused intervention, counseling, and neuro-linguistic programming, also known as NLP. She's also an accredited member of the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy, BACP. That means she's in England. She's the proud mom of 2 children, aged 38 and 28. And you see me looking surprised because when she comes on the show, you'll be surprised as well. She looks so good. And she is the loving grandmother of a 15-year-old grandson. That was my biggest shock. She has also faced her own personal challenges. When her younger son was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness at the age of 15, it marked the beginning of a long traumatic journey. Over the last 13 years, Delores has had to juggle demanding work responsibilities while at the same time navigating deeply emotional and trying times in her personal life. I've said a bit about her, but she'll tell you even more when she joins us in a few seconds. Welcome to Chatting with the Experts, Delores.
Hi, Paula.
Thank you so much for saying yes. I never take it for granted when I have guests because there's so many other things you could have done, but you said yes. So thank you for being a guest.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
Oh, I said a little bit about you because I always have the best guests. Their bios are always so impressive. I'm like, oh my word, where do I start? Where do I end? So I know I didn't say everything. Is there anything I left out that you'd like to talk about or tell the audience before we jump into the show?
I suppose it's really about, in the centre of all of this, God's in the centre, really. In all of the years I've worked in mental health, as you rightly said, that there's been some really challenging times, but prayer has been so important part of my life. And I think that's, all I really wanted to add at this time, at this stage.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Without God, where will we be? Where will I be? I know that for sure.
Same here, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you worked for over 25 years in the mental health profession with children. Let's talk about that, your experience, and how did you get into it, into the profession, and what's your experience there?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and that's a really good question because I started my studying later in life.
Mm.
My father had passed away in 2002, and I just started doing my psychology degree. And then I was coming to the end of a really difficult relationship that I was in. And I remember prior to starting the psychology course, I remember going to the open day. They do open days in the universities. And the lecturer that was facilitating said, I remember him clearly, and he said, if you're in a rocky relationship, by the end of this 3-year degree, you will end because of the growth and the development and the learning that you will have in oneself. And that's exactly what happened. And what that self-learning enabled me to do is build my self-esteem, build my confidence, recognize that actually I do have self-worth and confidence. And so it's what got me into it, really. So my own personal grief, but also coming to the end of a relationship that wasn't healthy for me at that time. And so from there, I decided I wanted to do counselling as a qualification. So went into that room after the psychology, and then that's been it. Gone into the voluntary sector, worked in different VSOs and also within the statutory NHS, and that's where I currently am working at the moment in mental health.
Wow, wow. I'm sorry to hear about your dad passing. I know loss, grief,
Yeah,
it's difficult. It's a long journey.
it is
Yeah.
absolutely a long journey. Yeah.
Mhm. I noticed that you work with children and family. Why children and families? Why not, teens, young adults, older adults?
Yeah,
Reason?
absolutely. And I think it's really important, when we work with the entire family, it's the systemic issues. And sometimes there's the intergenerational trauma that is just a thread that goes all the way through. So if I work with just, for instance, a young person, they're going back into the same family home, they're going back into the same environment where there could be issues, there's adversities. So working with the entire family unit just enables everyone to come from a different lens and understand and acknowledge and take their own responsibility and accountability. I think it's really important. That will enable the change, enable the empowering, enable the environment to change. You can't just leave it to one person, one child, or one parent to change. It's the entire environment.
I agree. And what ages are the children? Are they, like from 4, from 7 till 18? What age range do you?
In terms of within the NHS where I work, it's from about 4 to up to 18.
Okay.
Yeah. And then parents will get invited to sessions as well.
Okay. So, mental health, between when you started, and you said, I think it was shortly after your dad passed, or during the time he passed. So that was 2002. And now mental health has become, more mainstream. We can talk about it a bit more. But do you find there's still a stigma, or is it still taboo? Or how has that changed in between the time that you started and now?
In comparison to when I started in 2002, it's such a taboo, particularly in the African Caribbean community. And so, no one wants to talk about their business outside of the door. Everyone brushes things under the carpet. And it's almost like, don't you my business outside of the door.
Yeah,
What are you doing that for?
yeah.
And I suppose it's over the time, we're now in 2025, and it has changed, but we still have a way to go. So I even think about going into churches and talking about mental health, going into schools and going into other agencies so that we can ensure that mental health is being spoken about, mental health is spoken about within the home, because where else would we recognise changes in our children or in our parents? As far as I'm concerned, we all suffer from low mood without a doubt. However, it's how we manage to get out of that low mood. Does it then escalate into depression, clinical depression? Or is that low mood, let me put some things into place, like let's go to the gym, let's go on long family walks together, because all of those things help with the stimulating the endorphins in the brain. And so it's important that we talk about what's going on, changes. We have to recognise that in our young people, because otherwise the schools or other agencies don't do it for us. We're the first point of contact as parents. Let's think about how we can support our children and young people. I've got a thing as it's the first 5 years of a young person's life. So the attachment, the communication, how the children see how the parents interact with each other. The first 5 years are important because it shapes the last 70 years of someone's life. That's so real, really, really real.
Yes, yes, yes. And you said, the first 5 years of a child's life is so important because it affects the next 70 years. And you mentioned that you noticed that among African and Caribbean communities, and this is worldwide, not just in England, because I know you're in England, mental health is regarded as a taboo or a stigma.
Yeah.
And because, especially when you said the word 70 years, I know that as a people, as a race, even if we're not from the Caribbean or from Africa, but, like I know even among African Americans, we believe in extended family. So you have, multi-generations, in one family. So how do you find in your work, that how do you address that? Because, most times it's not just the child or the children and their and their mom and dad. You have aunties, uncles, and then you have the grandparents. How do you, deal with that?
Culture is very, very important. When I'm doing assessments for the service that I work with, it's important to, include culture. For me, I think about the village. As a village, we work together, the elders and the elders compared to the youngest. So it's really important that if a young person is not bringing in a parent, they're bringing in an older sister, that is fine also, because it's about the systemic way of thinking. It's a village. And even, I'm a manager within the NHS, and even within my team, I say to them, talk about culture. We don't always get it right. If you don't understand, ask. So talk about, what are there's something called the social graces. And within the social graces, it talks about culture, it talks about race, identity, religion. All of those things are really important for an individual's identity. If we leave out culture, that's part of an identity. That's minus something of a young person. So talk about it. Village mentality.
Village. So, somebody said, I think the first time I heard this said was Hillary Clinton, that it's a village
Yeah.
that raises a child. But she said, of course,
Yeah.
that comes from Africa. And it's true. We
True.
grew up with, grandparents, sometimes even great grandparents influencing what you did because,
Absolutely.
extended families were just part of the family. Your grandma,
Yeah.
her mom, her uncle, her brother, you do something. By the time you get home, it's reached, it's already at home and they know what has happened and they're waiting for you. So in other words, what
Absolutely.
you're saying is that you talk about culture and embrace culture and, educate too, because, it's
Absolutely.
education that sometimes or many times changes the mindset.
Yeah.
We were brought up in a culture, I was brought up in a culture where feelings weren't talked about, The only
Yeah.
feelings my mom used to always say, if you can't hear, you will feel, and it was a physical
Right.
act.
Right.
So people didn't
Yeah.
express their feelings.
Yeah. It's very important. And sometimes, even the word anger, when we about the word anger, and, for particularly some of our young males that come through, and the schools will put in the referral, oh, he gets really angry. Angry is an okay emotion. It's an emotion, but it's how we manage to regulate that
Yes.
anger. And so it's giving the young person the tools to talk about, I am angry right now, but what are the tools for you to regulate that? And that's my job, to ensure that they are able to manage all of those emotions, but talk about the emotions, not just I'm angry or I'm rageful or I'm, because sometimes those are the labels that get impressed onto these young people. And so it's important that they talk about these labels, they talk about their emotions, and not to be called, oh, you're just sensitive. It's not about sensitivity, it's about I want to be accountable for my feelings and my emotions.
So let's talk about one or two of those tools because yes, our young males are stigmatized, I want to say, with, that angry label. And
Mm.
dealing with that in the appropriate manner
Yeah.
can take away some of that, stigma, I want to say, or, the
Yeah.
negative association. You see a young male and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But if you get to know him, you may know the reason why.
Yeah.
So what are some of those tools?
So some of those tools are that you just identified, getting to know that young person, because sometimes these young people don't feel heard. So what are some of the, reframing some of the questions? Don't say, oh, you're angry. What's happening for you right now? Because often it's from 0 to 100 quite quickly. Let's think back from 0 to 10. What's going on there? From 0 to 20, break it down so that they can understand that actually, yes, it was that thing that happened 2 weeks ago that I've just built up over time and now I've exploded and it's been called you're rageful, you're angry. So it's really listening, talking, communicating, understanding that young people, thinking about what adversities that they may have been through in life at that time so far. You know, they could be 16, 17. We don't know what their life story is. So let's think about that. Let's talk to them about that. Really highlight their strengths, because sometimes it's you're negative, you're this, you're that. But what are your strengths? What are your protective factors? What do you want to do when you know get older? Who knows? I'm still thinking about what do I need to do when I get older. But a young person, you know, sometimes we're asked that question, what do you want to be when you're older? I don't know, you know, but let's work with that. Let's unpick that. Let's do, I don't know, some sort of support, a linear timeline. There's some of the things, they're your qualities. Really highlight qualities rather than staying on to negatives all the time, because that's probably what they hear all the time at school and elsewhere. That causes them to get really angry. No one listens.
No one listens. Yeah. You are so right. You are
Yeah,
so right. Many just want to be seen
yeah,
and recognize that you are someone, you are important, you're important to me. And so
yeah,
love yourself.
yeah, absolutely.
Talking about young men, young boys, you mentioned a personal story. Your
Yeah.
son, your 15-year-old son, was
Mm,
diagnosed with an illness and a
mm,
life-threatening disease, actually.
yeah,
Let's talk about that because I know that has kind of influenced you, what you do and the way you
yeah,
deal with trauma.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so my youngest son now is 28, and so at age 15, I can remember it to the day. And he used to go football practice, and it was a Saturday evening, Saturday afternoon, and picked him up from football practice. And he looked, he said, "Mum, I feel really, really tired, more tired than usual." And when I looked around at his eyes, the whites of his eyes were really yellow.
my gosh.
And I was like, I didn't notice that before. Anyway, that was the Saturday. Sunday, he seemed to pick up. And on the Monday, went to school and he came home. He said, "Mum, I was really nauseous at school and I actually vomited."
Oh,
Um, and his eyes, the whites of his eyes were still yellow. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm taking you to the doctor." So didn't go to school on the Wednesday, the Tuesday. Took him to just the local GP, and he said, "Oh, we're going to have to send for blood tests. We're going to have to do this." But he looks fine. He's a healthy lad, looks fine. So he went to school on the Wednesday and he came home and he still felt unwell. We're still waiting for the results to come back for the blood test from the GP. And I said, I was talking to a friend at work actually. She said, "Is your baby? Take him to the hospital. Take him to A&E." So the Thursday, got home from work on the Wednesday. I said, "Look, if you don't feel well, I'm going to take you to the hospital on the Thursday." And he didn't feel well overnight. So I said, "Right, we'll go in on the Thursday morning," which we did. And oh my goodness, that was just a whirlwind. Took him to the hospital. They done blood tests and they kept him in hospital immediately. All of these blood levels were really, really high. And it transpired that he had a liver disease just out of the blue.
my
And
God.
what they called it was autoimmune liver disease. So he was transferred to a hospital that was quite far away, but there was the world renowned for the liver in Western Europe. So I thought, I want the best for my son. So he was transferred there. And he was in hospital for about 3 weeks. They was doing test after test after test. And that was age 15.
My,
From age 15, he was going into his year 11, taking all of his exams. He actually missed one of the GCSEs because he'd been in hospital. Anyway, from there on, he was on medication after medication. So that was 2012. In 2014, he started to go to the bathroom quite regularly, and it was regular. Like sometimes he was going up to 4, 5, 6 times a day. Then it
wow.
increased, and he was then diagnosed with another autoimmune disease, which was called autoimmune colitis. So he was diagnosed with colitis as well. So he had the two autoimmune diseases. So that was age 17. He got diagnosed with that 2014. Then just went on and on, up and down the hospital, outpatients, appointments, there was check-in. And then one time in 2019, one of the outpatients appointments, they said, well, it looks as though the medication isn't working and you're going to have a liver transplant. And it was just out
At
of the blue, like
17.
that. So that would have been, he was 20 by then,
Okay. Oh my God.
20 years by then. And it was just like a normal conversation you and I was having right now. It was an outpatient appointment, and the consultant just said that. It was like my heart dropped, his heart dropped, because we didn't expect that. We just thought, okay, he's on medication, things are working, we're just plodding along. And they said just that in one of the consultant appointments. And we both looked at each other like in shock. I didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. We came out of that appointment and we just hugged each other, and just tears just came down, because I was like, God, why can't I just take all this pain away from my son? Give it to me. Let
Yes.
me have his pain. Let me have everything that he's going for, because all of his prime years, he's been in and out of hospital.
Yes. Oh, even now, as you're talking, I can see it's emotional.
It is. It
Yeah,
is.
it's hard. Ah,
It is.
sorry.
And that was 2019, in the June of 2019, and yet to go for a series of appointments to check in if he was suitable actually for a liver transplant, and he was. Then on the 8th of December 2019, it was quite interesting, because on that day I'd invited some friends round, and one of the friends that I'd invited round, it was just like a pre-Christmas dinner. One of the friends that I'd invited round, she was a hard prayer. She prayed, she prayed, she prayed. And some people cancelled and some people didn't attend. But I believe who was there was meant to be there.
Mhm.
And then I'm a person that I don't really answer my phone. Always going, I'm silent, or I'm like, oh, I can't be bothered, let it drop. But his phone, my son's phone, he'd actually left it on the table, and he was upstairs talking to friends. And I picked it up at one stage and I saw a private number call coming through. I'm like, oh, it's a private number. And it went off. And then the person started ringing. I looked at my phone and the private number came on my phone. And I'm like, this is this
Important.
this is important. So I picked up, and they said, is that Miss McPherson? Yes. We're trying to get hold of Kieran. We have a liver.
Wow.
And they've been trying to get hold of us for at least half an hour. She said he needs to come to the hospital now.
No preparation, nothing to, no warning, just come right down. Well, I understand. I mean, these things, they have to be done immediately.
And when there's a match,
Yes.
because from him being on the list, for as soon as the match comes about, the calls just come through.
Mhm.
So they sent an ambulance, and we had to go to the ambulance, and it was, they had to do blue lights. We needed to get there as soon as possible. I tell you, my heart's beating now. My heart was beating so much. We just hugged and prayed and hugged and prayed. And when I said to you that, the friend that I invited, she's a prayer. So when the call came through, everyone was there. We just went in the circle. Everyone was crying, and we were praying. My friend was praying and praying. We started ringing people saying prayers, 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 because Kieran's got but we need to go. We're on the way to the hospital. So we got to the hospital, and I'm really shivering now, even still thinking about it. Reliving the moment.
Yeah.
My older son was there, his brother, and everyone just came round. And then, yes, he was in hospital, and then he was in preparation. They prepared him, we prayed, and then there was about 10 of us around him praying. And then he went down for the liver operation. He was in there for about 7 hours in the operation.
Wow.
Yeah. We all stayed at the hospital. It was quite interesting because within that hospital, they have a Costa coffee. So we all took home in the corner of Costa within the hospital and to wait for him to come out of. So he actually went down about 1 a.m. So then he came out about 8 or 9 in the morning. Yeah.
Wow. And of
But
course, I know you were there, your prayer warriors were there with you, and God was there with you. And today he's 28.
28.
And how's he doing?
He's doing really, really well. Yeah, he's doing well. It's really interesting when you look back at photographs of him early 2019, later part of 2018, you could see how unwell he was
In comparison to now.
in comparison to now.
Wow.
I tell you. And so, praise God, right?
Praise God. Yes, yes. I'm just looking at you
Yeah,
and thinking, I know the heartache to see a child unwell.
yeah,
And, when it's a matter of life and death, because I've lived through that with one of my children. And so what that does is make you appreciate every single day. When you wake up and they're with you, you're like, you know what? I can't take this for granted. I can't say, oh, I'm getting old, because every time you look at the child, you realize this was God's grace that this child is
absolutely.
here, and
Yeah,
every day the child is still here. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Nothing but his grace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, so
What an
amazing.
amazing story about personal resilience and personal motivation. And so,
Yeah.
what's his name?
Kieran.
Aaron.
Kieran.
Kieran.
Yeah.
Wow, what a story about Kieran. I'm so happy to know that he's well. And as you say, you can see the difference between 2019 and 2025.
Yeah. Yeah.
Praise God for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so before we wrap up, I want to ask, how has that impacted not just your personal life, but how you operate in your professional life now
Mm.
with children and family, especially when it comes to mental health and trauma, because that's
Yeah.
trauma. You lived through
It's
trauma.
traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Paula, I think you said the words about gratefulness. Yeah. But also thinking about everyone's adversities are so different.
Mhm.
And they may look at me as a professional and say, oh, she's got it all together. She's all
Mm.
well put together. But you don't know what's happening behind the doors. And everyone's behind the door story is so different, but so meaningful to themselves because we all go through adversities. We all do.
Yes.
But for me, it's about getting through that door and the gratefulness and appreciation of life.
Yes. Yes. And I like how, when we spoke earlier on and when you're coming on to this show, you said one of the things you want to talk about is from adversity comes strength, and from strength comes
Yeah.
healing. So
Yeah.
I know that, that was personal. You're talking from the heart, because from this adversity, strength and healing has come.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. Never look at, they say you can't judge a book by the cover. You can't look at someone's appearance and think they have it all together, because no one does.
Absolutely. I agree.
So if anyone would like to get in touch with you, Delores, how can they find you? How can they get in touch with you? I guess online, or do you have a website?
Yeah. My site is being relaunched, so that will come. But on Instagram, I'm under My Mind Matters _UK.
I like that. Mind matters _UK. I love it. Yeah, because everybody's mind does matter.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. And are you on LinkedIn as well?
Of course, on LinkedIn under Delores McPherson.
Delores McPherson.
Yeah.
And for those of you who joined me today and those who will be watching this later on, I want to say, if you'd like to be a guest on this show, Chatting with the Experts, please reach out to me on my website, which is chattingwiththeexperts.com. Similarly to Delores, I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for Paula Oconee there. And I do have a business page. It's just chatting with the experts. I am on Instagram, and my handle there is @chat_experts_podcast. I'm on Facebook as Paula Oconee and as chatting with the experts. And I'm also on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. So if you'd like to be a guest and you've got a story or you have a mission like mine, which is to inspire, educate, and motivate women globally, reach out to me on those channels, and you too can be as wonderful as Delores has been. As she says, from adversity comes strength, and from strength comes healing. Thank you, Delores, for joining us today. And please, for all who joined us today, please stay back so that you can have a one-on-one conversation with Delores. There's so much more that we could talk about, but because of time, we couldn't. Thank you, Delores.
Paula, take care.